Question: does being opposed to taking vaccines entail being opposed to God? Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. First, why exactly is the individual opposed to taking vaccines? Is the basis for his opposition religiously justified or permitted? For example, is he opposed to certain vaccines because they are derived from or contain certain forbidden or impure substances? Or, for example, is he opposed to vaccines which their efficacy is unconfirmed, or studies have indicated that the side effects or potential harm caused by the vaccine or vaccines in question exceed their potential benefit? If a person was opposed to taking a vaccine or vaccines for any one of the aforementioned reasons, then he or she would not be opposing God or God's law or God's will or God's guidance. In fact, he or she would be complying with it, because our religion prohibits us from treating our illnesses with prohibited substances, as the Prophet said in the hadith, وَلَا تَدَاوُوا بِحَرَامٍ, and do not treat yourselves with what has been forbidden. And our religion prohibits us to expose ourselves to harm unnecessarily or with the surety of a greater benefit in return, as the Prophet said in the hadith, La darar wa la dirar, neither harm yourselves nor do harm to others. Second, it would be wrong for a person to oppose vaccines free of prohibited substances and with confirmed efficacy, believing that the concept of vaccination is haram, illegal or sinful, to consider it a religious duty not to take them, and to believe that taking them violates either the letter of Islamic law or its spirit or both. This would be wrong because of the explicit statements of the Prophet encouraging his ummah to treat their illnesses, as he said in the one hadith, Ya ibadallah, tadawu, O servants of Allah, treat your illnesses. And the Prophet's own practice of treating his illnesses, for example, he treated his illnesses with hijama, with cupping, for example. And the illnesses, he also treated the illnesses of some of his companions, for example, with a ruqya, with special invocations that he made for them, and with al-kay, cauterization. Third, vaccination shares the same ruling of treating illnesses generally. The majority of scholars consider treating illnesses as simply permitted or recommended, and only a small minority consider it mandatory. Even those who consider it mandatory only consider it mandatory in cases wherein the one being treated is certain or nearly certain of the efficacy of the treatment and its benefit. That said, it would be improper to say that being opposed to taking a vaccine as a personal choice is in effect being opposed to God, His will, or His law. Lastly, perhaps the questioner is specifically referring to the coronavirus vaccine and asking that if they choose not to take it because it remains an experimental vaccine approved for emergency use. Yes, brothers and sisters, it is experimental. We are guinea pigs. We are being experimented on. If a person refrains or wants to refrain from taking the vaccine because of this reality, will he or she be doing something wrong? The evidence provided by scholars, given the circumstances, supports caution and refraining from being vaccinated until the required level of confidence in the safety and efficacy of the vaccine is attained. Meaning, if a person chooses as a personal choice not to take the vaccine, the evidence provided by scholars supports that position, gives them that liberty to make that choice. They are not obligated, as some people may indicate, some fatwa may indicate, they are not morally obligated or religiously obligated to take the vaccine when the opportunity arises. They're not required to. The evidence does not support that. And the general rule, as we said, is that when it comes to vaccines, is that they take the same ruling of a tadawi, of treatment of illnesses, umuman, generally speaking. And the scholars generally say that it's permitted. Some of them say it's encouraged. Only a small minority say that it is required, and even they say it's only required if in the case of surety, certainty, or near certainty. However, that said, if a person chooses not to be vaccinated, he or she must also consider the safety of others and observe the precautionary measures encouraged by healthcare experts to minimize the spread of this deadly disease. So healthcare experts and disease control experts are recommending and have been recommending since the beginning of the pandemic mask wearing, social distancing, personal hygiene, etc. And so we have to follow these guidelines, especially those of us who are reticent to get the vaccine, because we still have to do our part in not spreading the disease. And this is supported by the hadith of the Prophet, which we mentioned earlier, in which he said, La darar wa la dirar. Neither harm yourselves nor do harm to others, and Allah knows best. Hada wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka nabi Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.